Week 5 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few wide receivers. I have his sleepers this week. The first receiver, Malik Washington of the Miami Dolphins. And now, obviously, Tyreek Hill, he's out for the season. Someone's going to step in and someone's going to get these targets left by Hill. But Malik Washington, he was mostly a depth guy. And obviously, a gadget guy that we use in him this season was Mike McDaniel in this offense. So week 2 versus New England, 3 carries, 23 yards, a catch, 2 yards, a return touchdown. Week 3 at Buffalo, 2 carries, 20 yards, 3 catches, 13 yards. In week 4 versus Jets, 2 carries, 8 yards, 2 catches, 13 yards. So when Hill went out in that game, he didn't really get much work. I know that we're leading the whole game was this Miami Dolphin team. Washington, he was added in a decent amount of leagues, but he's still out there right now in 84%. So if you need a sleeper receiver with teams on bye and the major injuries to Malik Nabers and Tyreek Hill, like I mentioned, wide receiver that could be a decent sleeper this week. Next receiver, Isaiah Bond of the Cleveland Browns. Bond out there in 97% of fantasy leagues. Cedric Tillman, he went on IR with injury, and now Bond, he's in there as the starting wide receiver, I assume, for this Cleveland Brown team. So the last 2 weeks, his targets and playing times have gone up. Week 3 versus Green Bay, 2 catches, 16 yards, 4 targets. And week 4 at Detroit, 3 catches, 58 yards on 6 targets. Now Dillon Gabriel in there as the starting quarterback for this Cleveland Brown team. Him and Bond obviously have a lot of second-team reps in training camp and in the preseason. So I expect there might be some rapport there. Both these guys elevated to the starting lineup. And like I said, Bond looked good in the 6 targets we saw last week. And this is going to be a game most likely. They're trailing early and often overseas versus the Minnesota Vikings. So this week I think Isaiah Bond goes out there. And if you need a sleeper in a pinch, he's available in 97% of fantasy leagues. And the final receiver, Jalen Tolbert of the Dallas Cowboys, still out there in 95% of fantasy leagues. Last week, a great catch on the sidelines. Pretty much his whole body was out of bounds, but he kept his feet in. Led to a big drive for the Dallas Cowboys. So Tolbert last season, we saw he had a decent year, acting as the number 2 wide receiver at times when Brandon Cooks was out. And now with CeeDee Lamb out a couple more weeks here, he's the number 2 wide receiver behind George Pickens. Week 3 at Chicago, 3 catches, 24 yards, a 2-point conversion, 6 targets. And then last week versus Green Bay, 4 catches, 61 yards on 6 targets. And him and Dak have a good rapport, like I said, going back to last season. He's a decent route runner, more of a slot guy than anything is Jalen Tolbert. But he's going to get those scammy type of routes and those cheap type of receptions in PPR leagues. So this week in a good matchup at the New York Jets, where their defense can't stop anyone, I think Tolbert's a solid sleeper option this week. So that's a few receivers. I have his sleepers for week 5 of the fantasy football season.